Obviously, the issue of Brexit is very much to the fore in all of our politics, even not just general elections, local elections, but obviously particularly in the European elections, because we could argue it was a result of the UKIP victory in 2014 that actually led to that pledge from the Tory leader David Cameron to offer an EU referendum. We did have that referendum, and the Green Party, on its documentation, all its official statements on its website, says that you officially accept the result of the referendum. But if you do accept the result of the referendum, why are you as a party campaigning for a second referendum?
So we accepted that the majority of the people voted to leave. It was quite a small majority, but it was a majority. And so the next step needed to be to go into negotiations with the European Union. And as we've gone through those negotiations, we've seen that a lot of the promises that were made in 2016 aren't able to be delivered, and that Brexit, as it's turning out, is very different from Brexit as it was promised in 2016. And so we think because it's such an important decision for the country, we have a right to have a final say, just to check it's still what everybody thinks is best for us all.
But I genuinely don't understand. The result on the referendum in 2016 wasn't for a particular deal. That wasn't even on the ballot paper. It was leave or remain. If you accept the result, then you can't want a second referendum, because that means you don't accept the result.
Well, you're quite right. There wasn't any detail about what Brexit would mean on the ballot paper in 2016. And that's why people who voted for Brexit had all sorts of different visions about what that might mean. For example, Daniel Hannan said we'd definitely be staying inside the single market. For example, Boris Johnson said there'd be £350 million for the health service.
Well, there's been more than that since, hasn't there? More than that sum has been pledged to the NHS since then.
No, absolutely not. That was just a lie, and the morning afterwards they all ran away from that promise. But the main point is, because it was like they assembled a majority by promising all sorts of different things to all sorts of groups of people, and that majority is not secure now, because a lot of what was promised, and the reasons people voted for Brexit just isn't in the deal that we're being offered. Okay. So that's why we think the whole country needs to be able to say, yes, this is what we want, or no, we think we should change our minds.
So on this second referendum, which is a key plank of the Green Party manifesto, what would the question be?
So we don't believe you should offer people the opportunity to vote for something that's actually not possible or not defined. And therefore we think there's two real future options for our country: an exit deal as negotiated by the Prime Minister, or remaining in the European Union. And that should be the choice.
Why would a no-deal Brexit not be, given that when the MPs voted for there to be the Article 50 to actually be in vote, that if you actually read the wording, it was effectively whether there is a deal or not, we would leave on the 29th of March. Now, we've not done that. There's been a delay, 2 or 3 delays. I think we're probably expecting more. But a no-deal Brexit is perfectly possible. Why is that? Why should that not be an option?
But nobody knows what no-deal Brexit means.
Well,
it's
they do.
Undefined. No, they don't.
No, they do.
It could be let me just get to the end of what I'm saying, because I think this is my space to explain Green Party policy. I, as a respectable politician and a kind of responsible politician, don't think it's possible to let people say, oh, we'll have no deal, and then define afterwards what that means. Because, for example, Nigel Farage thinks it's a brilliant idea to have much closer trade deals with the US and to allow them to come in and buy up our NHS. But other people think we should stick with a close relationship with the EU. So if we voted for a no deal, all that would happen is all this endless wrangling and division would just continue, because it would still be undefined. And that's why we don't think that should ever be put on as an option on a ballot paper.
But just because the Green Party don't think that that's a good option for the reasons you've explained, doesn't mean it isn't a perfectly possible option. And if you say you do actually accept the outcome of the 2016 referendum, but you want to have Remain still on the option, you've got to have leave with no deal. Leave with no deal is a more viable, more possible option than leaving with the Prime Minister's deal. That's been voted down 3 times already.
Look, it's just undefined. I mean, people can vote that the moon's made of green cheese. It doesn't make it so. But I think it would really be useful if we moved on to talk about the future and stopped going back over the past.
I tell you what, Molly, you get to answer the questions.
It would be nice if we could talk a little bit about the European elections and not just endlessly wrangle about what happened 3 years ago.
Molly, okay, this is how it works. I'm interviewing you, so I get to ask the questions that I'm interested in having answered. You can choose not to answer them. That's entirely your point. Given that the key reason why these European elections is happening is because Brexit hasn't been delivered, and your party says on its website and all its documentation you accept the result of the 2016 referendum, it is reasonable to ask why you want a second referendum, which is basically your European policy now.
I already answered that question.
Yes.
I'm happy to repeat myself.
Okay,
I think it would be more constructive. I mean, I'm just politely suggesting that people might be interested in what we're standing for.
Well, yeah, Molly, that is what you're standing for, which is why I'm asking you about it. Why do you want to stay in the European Union?
Okay, so since I've been elected an MEP for the past 5 years, I've worked very hard to stop corporate tax avoidance. That's the way companies push their profits from country to country to avoid paying taxes so we can't fund our health service properly and can't repair the roads and so on. Now, we've made really strong progress, but we need to carry on with that work. And that's one of the key planks of what we're talking about for these European elections. And it's simply impossible to address that at a national level because it's the multinational nature of corporations that allows them to shift those profits. And this is why we say we are tough on Brexit, but we're also tough on the causes of Brexit. Because if we had rich people and companies paying their taxes properly, then people wouldn't ended up in such a desperate situation that they felt the only option was to leave the EU and to vote for Brexit.
Okay, we're putting a lot of reasons into people's minds about why they voted for Brexit. But corporate tax avoidance absolutely is an international issue, but it can't be tackled just by the EU. It needs to be tackled, for instance, by other countries like America. We're not in a union, a political union with America. Surely this is just about international cooperation, which would actually make sense for all governments to do. But you don't necessarily need to be in a political union with a country to actually cooperate with them, do you?
Well, so the point is that what the European Union does is it sets high standards. I'm discussing tax, but also on climate change, also on civil and human rights, also on general environmental standards. And then because we're a big market of 500 million people, we can then use that consumer power and that trading power to actually encourage the rest of the world to rise to our standards. So at a time when we're seeing really dangerous leaders like Trump pulling out of the Paris Agreement and other countries threatening human rights, we need to have that strong beacon of hope for standards on environment and human rights, and that's what the European Union can provide because of its strength.
Except in a lot of areas when it comes to animal rights, environmental issues, carbon emissions, when it comes even to just things like, basic things like maternity pay and rights, things like that. Actually, the UK is well ahead of EU law. So we're not being dragged up to EU standards. We're already ahead of EU standards. Again, why do we need to be a member of the EU in order to deliver those things for our people and our country?
Well, I could parry back to you with things like the Habitats Directive that protects wildlife, the Water Quality Directive that means we have much cleaner rivers than we did when we joined, the Bathing Water Directive. I'm here in Bournemouth so that we have lovely clean beaches now. The point is, when the European Union works well, we have a highest common denominator. So everybody gets brought up to the highest standards. So we care about animal welfare, the French care about good quality food, the Germans have good standards of energy efficiency, and we work together for everybody's standards to come up. Okay. And that's why the single market has worked really well, and that's why the Conservatives traditionally created it and have supported it.
Okay, let's talk about what's going to happen at these European elections. So next Thursday, the polling is showing the Brexit Party is ahead, pushing Labour down, and Tories now in a fifth place. Your own party doing better than the Tories, in fact. And of course, in these elections, we don't have the first past the post system. So the Greens have always traditionally done very well. And yet there have been lots of calls for the Remain supporting parties, the second referendum supporting parties like you, like Liberal Democrats, the new Change UK party, to form a Remain alliance. Why did that alliance not come about?
Well, the point about democracy is we have different visions of what the future should look like. And so although there are various parties in these elections, including the Green Party, that think we're better off staying in the EU, we have different ideas about what that might mean. And when we elect MEPs, they'd be doing different things in Europe. So I think people who support Remain shouldn't get their knickers in too much of a twist about this. We know that the Brexit Party will get more votes than anybody else. They have the support of about a third of the people in this country. And then the strongly Remain parties will probably get about the same amount. And then in the middle are the people that will decide where our country is actually going. And our job as people who support Remain is to be positive about staying in the European Union, and in my case, be positive about the action Greens would like to take on climate, on tax avoidance, and on all the other things where we're leading in Europe.
Did the Greens ever actually want to form an alliance or have tactical voting?
Well, I think you know that technically that would have been really difficult given that the elections were called really late, and there was never any approach made by the Lib Dems for us to do that.
Vince Whiteman, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Vince Cable, has blamed the Greens and the Change UK parties rather than the Liberal Democrats. They say they did approach.
Yes, well, that's their narrative for these elections.
So is that a lie?
Not true.
They didn't approach?
Yes, they didn't approach us. But the really important thing is all of this chat about should there be an alliance, who should do what to whom and all that stuff is not the main point. The main point is about turnout. if the Remain parties turn out, if Remain voters come out to vote, we can still get more than the Brexit party. So I would encourage anybody listening who doesn't want the Brexit party to win to choose the Remain party and to make sure everybody they know goes out to vote on the 23rd of March.
I think we should absolutely encourage everybody to go out and vote. Your vote's there for a reason. You need to use it, however you're going to vote. But of course, this isn't the only election we've had. We've already had the local elections, and again, the Greens did well. And we also, of course, who knows, we may end up with a general election. That's certainly what Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, is holding out for. We may, though, on predictions now, end up with a hung parliament, and parties like your own and the Liberal Democrats and other minor parties, smaller parties, could well actually hold the power in a hung parliament. Who would you be more likely to back, whoever the leader of the Conservatives is, or a Corbyn-led Labour government?
Well, I'm actually part of a Europe-wide Green Party and Green movement, and so we're very used to the situation where we end up with maybe 10% of the vote and that number of seats, and then we need to negotiate what kind of position we should take and who we should be in government with. But that's something that happens after the election, and you sit down and you compare the programmes. So it will be premature, I think, at this point to say what a coalition government might look like. But actually that way of doing politics, offering different visions before the election, then on the basis of your support in that election, deciding what the government looks like, is a much more mature way of running democracy. And if we had a fair voting system, we could have that in Britain as well.
But you must have an inkling, whether it's you speaking personally or on behalf of the Green Party, about whether you'd rather go into coalition with, let's say, a Boris Johnson or Dominic Raab, whoever-led Conservative government, or a Jeremy Corbyn-led Labour government. Which would be your inkling?
Well, quite honestly, this idea that those are the two main options, I think, is starting to break down.
I think they are the two main options, aren't they?
Well,
unless the Liberal Democrats or the Change UK party suddenly become the largest party in Parliament.
I don't agree with you. I don't think the Conservative Party is any longer a coherent party, so I'm not convinced that they could put together a coalition, because they're not actually governing the country at the moment. They're not a coherent political force, and I don't think they can govern the country now, and I don't think they would be part of a successful government coalition.
So you think you'd be backing a Corbyn coalition then?
That's not what I said.
That's what I'm asking you a question.
Yeah, and I'm answering your question by saying that we would go into the election on our platform and we would negotiate afterwards, and that's the appropriate way to do it.
Do you not think it's worrying, given that you're saying that this 2016 EU referendum, people voted and they didn't know all the possible ramifications, all the possible outcomes? That's the same for any election. Say even the next general election, people won't know who the Green Party are going to support in the event of a hung parliament. Do you not think then we could have the reason we could just rerun every general election every couple of months, because we'd have new information?
Well, we run every general election again after 5 years, don't we? That's why we're a democracy.
We don't run general elections again. We have a new general election. It's quite a different thing.
Yeah, when circumstances have changed, when people have changed their minds. But that's not the same, because this is about a referendum. This is why referendums are a very delicate political instrument, and why they should be used with care, and why people should be very clear what they're voting for. For example, in the Scottish independence referendum, there's 450 pages of detail about what Scottish independence would mean. By contrast, the referendum on leaving the EU, which was in many ways a bigger decision for us all, was actually totally undefined. And as I said already, people thought it was meaning all sorts of different things. So in a referendum, what we should learn is that we have to define what the options are extremely carefully.
OK, Molly Scott-Cato, thank you very much. Molly Scott-Cato is the Green Party candidate for the South West. Also standing in the South West region are representatives from Change UK, the Conservatives, the Brexit Party, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats, UKIP and the following independents: Larch Maxi, Mathia Rahman and Neville Seed. For a full list of every candidate standing in every region in the European elections, just visit our website, talkradio.co.uk.